Imagine you've been following a self-help guru for years. You've attended his retreats. You trust him to help you live up to all of your potential. So when he asks you to sit in a sweat lodge for hours, you do it, almost without question. But as the sweat lodge gets hotter, as it gets harder to breathe, as your body rebels against you, that very same guru tells you that leaving the sweat lodge would mean weakness. It would mean that you aren't pushing yourself enough. It would mean that you aren't enlightened enough. So you stay, despite your body and your mind screaming to escape. Today, we are talking about James Arthur Ray and the tragic, deadly things that happened at his sweat lodge retreat. We'll try to answer the questions: what drove this man to push people beyond their physical limits in the pursuit of enlightenment? And what can we learn from the tragic deaths at this Sedona retreat? This is the story of James Arthur Ray, the rise, the fall, and the devastating consequences of blind faith in the self-help industry and their so-called gurus. So sit back, relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hi, everyone. Welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cult, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. I'm releasing 3 videos every single week this October, so I really hope that you'll subscribe and stick around, because we're not just covering cults and true crime this month. We are diving into vampires, witches, all of that spooky stuff among all of this heavier topics that we tend to cover here. So maybe you'll learn a little bit about the origin of vampires or ghosts and what the many theories are behind ghosts and ghost stories. So please consider subscribing as we move into this spooky season. Now, there's quite a bit to get into today, so we are going to jump right in. Starting from the very beginning, James Arthur Ray was born in 1957 in Oklahoma, and he grew up in a deeply religious household. His father, Gordon Ray, was a preacher in the Church of God. Now, this denomination emphasizes a conservative, very literal interpretation of the Bible, and Ray's early life was shaped by these strict religious teachings. His father's role as a preacher had a profound effect on Ray's formative years, instilling in him an early understanding of spiritual concepts, morality, and the importance of faith. However, the strictness of his upbringing also left Ray questioning the limitations of the traditional Christian doctrines he was raised on. As a child, Ray often participated in church activities and was exposed to the ideas of salvation, sin, and the fear of eternal damnation, which were key components in his father's sermons. The conservative and somewhat rigid nature of the Church of God emphasized obedience, humility, and a focus on the afterlife rather than any material success or self-empowerment. This environment instilled in Ray a fascination with spirituality, but he also felt confined by its restrictions. Over time, Ray became increasingly disillusioned with the narrow worldview that the Church of God presented, prompting him to seek out alternative spiritual and philosophical ideas as he got older. In his teenage years and into adulthood, Ray began to explore teachings that combined spiritual enlightenment with personal success, something that diverged sharply from his father's focus on traditional religious values. He sought to find a balance between spirituality and material success. He wanted to get that money, baby. Eventually, he developed a hybrid philosophy that would come to define his career in the self-help industry. This divergence from his father's strict religious views allowed Ray to kind of forge his own path, blending elements of Eastern philosophies such as meditation and energy work with those Western ideas of self-improvement and, ding, 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 wealth creation. His complex relationship with his religious upbringing became a core part of the spiritual framework he later promoted to millions through his seminars and books. So Ray's path to success began in the early 1990s when he worked as a sales trainer for AT&T, and then he later started delivering his own personal development seminars. His ability to blend spiritual teachings with practical advice for achieving wealth attracted a lot of attention, and that's kind of an understatement. But his real breakthrough came in 2006 when he was featured in the widely popular documentary The Secret, which introduced millions to the law of attraction, the idea that positive thinking could and would manifest success in every single area of your life. And if you want to hear more about the law of attraction and hear my personal analysis and opinion on the topic, you can check out this video right here. So, riding the wave of The Secret's success, Ray authored Harmonic Wealth in 2008, which became a bestseller. His brand grew very quickly, with followers literally flocking to his seminars, paying thousands of dollars for the promise of life-changing transformations. By the early 2000s, James Arthur Ray had established himself as a prominent figure in the self-help industry. He hosted expensive retreats that promised these life-changing transformations, teaching a blend of that spiritual enlightenment, but also wealth-building techniques and mental toughness. His World Health Summit, Quantum Leap, and Harmonic Wealth seminars were drawing thousands of people willing to pay upwards of $5,000 per ticket. This is literally to just go listen to a dude wax poetic and tell you how you can be a better person, but only if you follow his teaching. I mean, I'm sure there were people that he did help. I do believe in the self-help space. There are people that I love to follow when it comes to self-help, but I would never pay $5,000 to go to one of these events. It just feels so exploitative. I would always say go to an actual therapist who can help you with your mindset. But anyways, I digress. So his teaching emphasized the power of personal will. He suggested that by mastering your mind, you could achieve limitless success in every area of your life: spiritual, financial, mental, and emotional. Ray developed a cult-like following. His seminars, often described as spiritual boot camps, combined motivational speaking with intense mental and physical challenges. But while some attendees reported feeling empowered, others were left feeling drained, overwhelmed, and even manipulated. So let's get into some of those challenges that attendees were expected to face at some of these workshops. So in Ray's Creating Absolute Wealth workshop, participants were subjected to extreme physical endurance exercises to symbolize overcoming obstacles in their lives. We've heard this before, haven't we? One of the most notorious challenges in this workshop was the samurai game. So this exercise required participants to role play as samurai warriors and confront simulated life or death situations. Ray introduced elements of warfare and demanded obedience, telling participants to embrace the spirit of the samurai: loyalty, self-sacrifice, and discipline. During the game, attendees had to make difficult decisions, such as choosing who would quote-unquote die in the exercise. The game fostered intense emotional pressure and competition, leading to some attendees to break down in tears or experience high levels of stress. The game was meant to force participants to reflect on their values, priorities, and decisions under pressure. However, critics argued that this practice preyed on participants' vulnerabilities and pushed them toward emotional extremes. And if someone is pushed towards an emotional extreme, they are much easier to control and manipulate. Ray also ran weekend workshops under the theme of harmonic wealth, which focused on achieving success in all aspects of life. I mean, how many times am I going to repeat that sentence itself? Like, yes, we get it, James Arthur Ray. All of your seminars are exactly the same. They just have different titles and are wrapped up in different looking cute little bows. But some of the challenges in this seminar were more focused on psychological endurance and overcoming fear. One challenge was glass walking. And you guessed it, it involved walking barefoot across shards of broken glass, a practice that's been used by some motivational speakers to symbolize overcoming fear, but it's just plain dangerous to me. And I'm sure when you sign up for these workshops, you sign away all your rights to holding them accountable for your health in any way. Like if you cut yourself on a shard of glass and you have to go to the hospital, you can't have the people running the workshop pay for that or sue them. I would just imagine that there's some kind of documentation involved that means that you're never ever going to tell anybody that you had a negative experience at the workshop. Participants of this challenge were told that the ability to complete the walk successfully depended on their mental focus, courage, and ability to stay calm in high pressure situations. While some participants successfully completed the task, others reported cuts and injuries, raising concerns about the safety of this exercise. Another challenge involved breaking wooden boards with their hands, reminiscent of martial arts training. This was framed as a metaphor for breaking through mental and emotional barriers in life. This is also something that you can learn to do in talk therapy. You don't have to break a board or walk on glass after paying $5,000 to go do it. And while the exercise might be empowering for some, the physical strain led to injuries for others. And I'm sure we all guessed that, right? Now, the Practical Mysticism seminar incorporated more spiritual and meditative challenges, but maintained the intensity seen in his other workshops. So he would have them engage in extended meditation and isolation. Participants were required to meditate for very long periods of time, often in silence while confronting deep personal fears or traumas. Ray often combined meditation with sleep deprivation, fasting, or isolation, encouraging participants to transcend their physical needs to reach a higher spiritual state. While meditation is a very valuable practice, I meditate every single morning. But when you combine it with deprivation and isolation, a lot of participants were left disoriented and mentally vulnerable, which caused some people to have extreme emotional breakdowns. Another key challenge in this seminar was firewalking, where participants would walk barefoot across hot coals. Ray framed this as yet again an act of personal empowerment. He encouraged participants to overcome those fears by trusting their mental focus. Firewalking has also been used in motivational and spiritual contexts by other leaders, most notably Tony Robbins. I've had friends that have gone to his workshops and they're like, oh, they're amazing, but he's also kind of a little bit of a sketchball. Let me know if you want me to cover him because there are a lot of skeletons in that man's closet, but I digress. The thing is, these challenges are not without risk. And obviously, after walking on hot coals, many attendees reported burns and injuries from this practice. Now, the Quantum Leap workshop was designed to help participants experience rapid personal growth, involved high-risk exercises, and self-discovery challenges. There were a lot of really high-pressure challenges involved in this workshop. Participants were often pushed to their physical and emotional limits through intense group exercises where they had to rely on each other to complete these challenges. And I'm sure it was coded in the we're going to work together and collaborate and support each other. And this is how you build community. And this is also something that makes people feel instantly connected and vulnerable with one another. These exercises could include anything from physical endurance tests to group activities that required participants to share deeply personal stories or vulnerabilities. The intensity of the environment often led to more emotional breakdowns, which Ray would frame as a breakthrough or a personal revelation. However, these methods were inherently manipulative, leaving many participants emotionally scarred from the experience. And it could have very well made some of the participants emotionally dependent not only on James Arthur Ray, But on the other participants, this is why considering therapy before spending an exorbitant amount of money on one of these self-help workshops is going to be probably the better move, because that therapist is educated and prepared to hold all of that space for you and offer up tangible tools that you can use in your everyday life. I am such an advocate for mental health care and therapy. I think it's vitally important. And I think you will be in a much more safe environment than attending one of these self-help guru influencer retreats. So across all of these seminars, a common thread was Ray's use of psychological manipulation and high-pressure tactics. He often created environments that stripped participants of their normal comforts like food, sleep, and privacy, all under the guise of breaking through the deeper levels of personal growth. These tactics put participants in vulnerable positions where they were more likely to comply with extreme requests or believe that they had experienced some kind of life-altering breakthrough. Many participants described feeling this pressure to continue with challenges even when they felt unsafe or unsure due to these intense dynamics and Ray's charismatic leadership. It's safe to say that Ray's methods were increasingly extreme, and by 2009, they would actually prove to be deadly. The Spiritual Warrior Retreat was held by James Arthur Ray in October of 2009. It took place over several days as a resort near Sedona, Arizona. The retreat, which cost participants up to $10,000 each, $10,000 for 5 days, promised to help attendees achieve personal breakthroughs through a series of extreme physical, mental, and spiritual challenges. These challenges ultimately led to the deaths of 3 participants during a sweat lodge ceremony. But the sweat lodge ceremony was the climax of an already damaging retreat. On day 1 of the retreat, October 4th, 2009, the focus was orientation, some rituals, and initial challenges. So participants arrived at the Angel Valley Retreat Center, where they were greeted by James Arthur Ray and his team. The first day primarily involved orientation and setting the tone for the retreat. Ray's spiritual warrior seminars were known for using psychological pressure, and he would introduce the idea that participants needed to abandon their ego and push through extreme challenges to achieve a breakthrough. One of the first symbolic acts of the retreat involved head shaving. Participants were asked to shave their heads as a gesture of humility and shedding their own identities. I mean, as a woman, there's so much of my identity tied to my hair. And I have heard some survivors of this retreat share the same sentiment that there was an emotional tie to the head shaving act. And if I recall, some of the survivors really, really regretted doing this because it really changed how they saw themselves, and not in a good way. But Ray emphasized that this was a way to prepare for spiritual rebirth and transformation. It was presented as a way to remove attachments to vanity and embrace some humility. And for some, yes, it was reinforcing the idea of personal transformation. For others, it felt like a coercive ritual designed to strip them from their individuality. This was not just some simple task to complete. It set the tone for the extreme mental and emotional pressures that would follow. There was also a heavy focus on meditation and introspection, where Ray encouraged participants to reflect on their fears and limitations, promising that overcoming them would lead to success and personal growth. So, day 2 introduced one of the key components of this retreat, the Vision Quest. Participants were sent into the Arizona desert to spend 36 hours alone with barely any provisions. Each person was given a sleeping bag, a bottle of water, and a notebook. The isolation was meant to force them to confront their inner selves, and the fasting was encouraged as a way to cleanse their bodies and minds. Now, I want to make this extremely clear. You do not need to fast or be alone out in the desert with nothing to eat or drink for a day and a half to clear your mind or find yourself. You don't. And you sure as hell don't need to spend $10,000 to go sit in wilderness alone. What a scam. Ray instructed participants to push through the hunger and exhaustion, framing these physical deprivations as necessary for spiritual growth. And meanwhile, he's back, at headquarters in Sedona, probably chowing down, eating away in his comfy bed, in his air conditioning, not in the desert of Arizona. And many participants reported feeling disoriented, weak, and extremely vulnerable during this part of the retreat. But Ray insisted that they stay in the desert and not give in to physical discomfort. During this time, participants were not allowed to talk to each other. You're in the dark, in the elements, where there are wild animals, and you're not allowed to talk to each other or ask for help or see how each other's doing. They were told to focus entirely on their internal journey. The isolation, combined with the lack of food and sleep, was intended to weaken their resistance to the challenges ahead. James Arthur Ray is literally priming the attendees of this workshop to do everything that he says. Because if you want to control someone, these are the steps you take in order to do so. You deprive them of their basic human needs, so then they start depending on you as the leader to guide them and provide them. Their basic human needs end up becoming a gift instead of something that they're entitled to. And it is deeply, deeply manipulative. And it's a tactic that we see with cult leaders. Every single cult leader. It's a tactic we see in every single story I have told on this channel. I could go on a rant for days, but let's continue. Erin, keep it professional. So day 3 was all about meditation, emotional confrontation, and of course, fasting, because who needs to eat when you're enlightened? So there were a lot of emotional breakthroughs after returning from the desert, and participants were immediately plunged into these intense emotional exercises. Of course they were. I mean, that's, to me, bordering on abuse now. Because these often took the form of public confessions where participants were encouraged to share their deepest fears, traumas, and insecurities with the group. Ray even pushed participants to break down emotionally, as if breaking down, crying, exposing yourself to all of these strangers was somehow helping you grow, framing their breakdowns as breakthroughs. The group sessions were high-pressure environments, with Ray using aggressive language to confront participants about their limitations. Many attendees were physically and emotionally weakened from the lack of food and sleep, making them more susceptible to Ray's charismatic authority and groupthink. He often used peer pressure to push participants to stay in the retreat, even if they expressed discomfort or doubts. If you want people to A, bond right away, and B, you want to gain collateral on those people, do a share circle like this. I'm not obviously giving advice, but this is what highly manipulative and controlling people do. This is what cult leaders do. This is how they gain collateral, because if you do leave, he has all of your private admissions saved. If you were to complain about his mistreatment of you, he would be able to look to all of your confessions and say, oh, no, this person has issues. They came to me for help. It's not my fault that they felt embarrassed that they confessed this thing to me, even though he basically coerced the confession out of them. It's inherently abusive and dangerous to do these practices and trust these gurus like this. So at this point, many were exhausted, having gone days with little to no food or rest. But Ray continued to press them toward greater challenges. The idea of playing full on and not giving up became a mantra during the retreat. So here we are at day 4, the Sweat Lodge ceremony.
From the Sweat Lodge ceremony that killed 3 people in Arizona 2 weeks ago. Nearly 24 others had to be hospitalized after the ceremony, which was part of a so-called spiritual warrior retreat.
The final day of the retreat featured the now infamous Sweat Lodge ceremony. The sweat lodge was a makeshift structure made of tarps and wooden poles, resembling a traditional Native American purification ritual, but taken up to an extreme level. Before entering the sweat lodge, participants were told that this would be the ultimate test of their willpower and determination. Ray repeatedly emphasized that only by enduring the discomfort of the heat could they experience spiritual rebirth. Nearly 60 participants entered the lodge, which was designed to hold a lot fewer people. Heated rocks were brought in, and hot water was poured over them to create this intense steam, and it raised the temperatures to dangerous levels. Ray led the ceremony and told participants to stay inside, encouraging them to ignore their body's signals of distress. He assured them that their suffering was part of the transformative process. Just disgusting, disgusting behavior because these people all trusted him. As the temperature rose, participants began to experience signs of extreme distress, including vomiting, fainting, and even collapsing. Some participants begged to leave, but Ray urged them to stay, telling them that it was their way of breaking through their limitations. The small space, combined with the lack of ventilation and high humidity, created a life-threatening environment. Despite clear signs of danger, Ray insisted the ceremony continue. After several rounds of intense heat, some participants lost consciousness, and it became clear that they were in severe medical distress. Eventually, some people managed to escape the lodge, but by then, several participants were critically injured. When the ceremony finally did end and the door to the sweat lodge was opened, it became clear that something had gone terribly, terribly wrong. Some of these people hadn't just passed out. Some of them were now dead. Emergency services were called, but by the time they arrived, 3 participants, Kirby Brown, James Shore, and Liz Newman, were either dead or near dead from heat stroke and organ failure.
Those 3 people dying after something went terribly wrong at a sweat lodge ceremony. Ray eventually convicted on 3 counts of felony negligent homicide.
Dozens of others were rushed to the hospital with life-threatening injuries. And Ray, how did he react? Well, initially he downplayed the severity of the situation, claiming that, the participants chose to stay in the sweat lodge and that their distress was part of the process. But yeah, I don't think any of them wanted to die. You know, Ray, I don't think that's what they wanted. But luckily, investigations quickly revealed that the sweat lodge had been poorly constructed, overcrowded, and conducted without proper safety measures. Witnesses even testified that Ray had ignored clear signs of danger and had pushed participants to stay inside despite their distress. Survivors have even described the experience inside the sweat lodge as a living nightmare. Beverly Bunn, who narrowly escaped death, testified that the heat was unbearable and that many participants were showing clear signs of distress long before the final outcome.
I started to look around and I saw that there were many people lying around who were not conscious. I saw people with mucus coming out of their nose. I saw mucus coming out of their mouth. I saw eyeballs rolled back in their heads.
She recalled people vomiting, passing out, and begging to leave. But Ray encouraged them to endure, telling them that it was a real test of their mental toughness. Participants said that they trusted Ray. They believed that he wouldn't put them in harm's way. But by the end of the ceremony, people felt trapped, physically and mentally manipulated into staying despite their bodies failing them. One survivor, Melinda Martin, recalled seeing people lying unconscious on the ground while Ray reassured the group that everything was part of the process. And Beverly Bunn described the sweat lodge as stifling and suffocating. The lodge was made of tarps and wood with superheated rocks placed in the center with water poured over them in intervals, and it raised the temperature to dangerous levels. 60 people were in that space with little to no ventilation, in the heat, made only hotter by their body heat, I'm sure. And Bunn recalled that Ray positioned himself as the leader of the ceremony, and told participants, well, they could leave whenever they wanted, but if you left because you're uncomfortable, then I guess you're just not as devoted to your spiritual growth and enlightenment. He emphasized phrases like playful on and urged participants to not give up. Many participants felt the pressure and they endured because they feared being judged by him and the group. So they stayed, despite the escalating heat and their deteriorating physical conditions. And as the heat intensified, several people began to show signs of distress. People were passing out, vomiting, laying on the ground unresponsive. And then some tried to leave, but would feel like disoriented and trapped because of the layout of the lodge. They would literally try to get out, but they were so far gone, so on the verge of passing out, that they couldn't even find the door to the exit. And despite these clear signs of danger, Ray insisted that they stay inside and push their bodies and ignore all of their bodies' signals. Bun herself felt close to passing out, but managed to leave the lodge before it was too late. She later testified that she had felt pressure to stay longer, despite the fact that she was fearing for her life. Sydney Spencer, another participant, also described feeling trapped inside the sweat lodge. She recounted that the lodge became hotter and hotter with each round, and it was clear that many participants were suffering. Spencer remembered people begging for water and struggling to breathe. She noted that while Ray had emphasized that the experience was supposed to help everyone break through those mental and physical barriers, she realized way too late that they were pushing their bodies far beyond safe limits. Spencer eventually passed out from the heat, but luckily she was revived after being pulled from the lodge. She later described the feeling of helplessness and group pressure to stay inside, as well as her belief that Ray, who had established himself as an authoritative figure, wouldn't have put them in real danger. Survivors noted that Ray had created a psychologically manipulative environment where participants felt pressured to prove their strength and commitment to their own personal growth. So this led many to stay in the lodge longer than they should have, fearing that leaving would be seen as a failure on their spiritual journey. Plus, it's kind of like the sunk cost fallacy. They spent $10,000 to be there, thinking that they're going to emerge this incredible person, emerge a person who's going to start getting tons of material success. Participants also described feeling disoriented, confused, and they just were not able to think clearly because of the extreme heat. And this also contributed to their inability to exit the lodge safely. Now, these survivor stories, they painted a picture of a retreat that went dangerously wrong, driven by a charismatic leader who pushed his followers way too far. This combination of extreme physical stress and psychological manipulation ultimately led to disaster. And James Arthur Ray underplayed the severity of the Sweat Lodge tragedy, both during and after the fatal event.
Well, I didn't know, nor did anyone know, that anyone was in a life or death situation. I've been very physical all my life, and what I noticed was a lot of people having challenges, much like you would see at a marathon or any other physical activity.
He continued to urge them to endure intense heat, presenting it as a test of willpower and spiritual resilience. And when individuals did collapse or vomit or pass out inside the sweltering sweat lodge, he downplayed their symptoms, framing the participants' suffering as part of the transformational process they were undergoing. This mindset encouraged people to stay inside, even when they were experiencing very clear signs of severe heat stroke. After the ceremony ended and emergency services were called, Ray's initial reaction was to just distance himself from the tragedy. He suggested that the participants were responsible for their own choices to stay inside the lodge, deflecting responsibility completely, despite being the leader of the event and directly encouraging them to remain. His attitude of downplaying the incident continued in the immediate aftermath when it became clear that some participants were critically injured or had already died. I just don't know what kind of person in their right mind who claims that they care about other people could guide people to their own death and not show any remorse. I don't care what the legal implications of doing so are. This was your fault. I don't think I could live with myself if I knew I had any part in someone's death, no matter how it happens. One of my biggest fears is getting into like a car accident and accidentally someone passing away and I'm involved in that. Like, I don't know. I don't know how you can live with yourself. I just don't understand. I just don't understand. And multiple people had this experience with him. So Ray's refusal of acknowledging the gravity of the situation quickly grew criticism from survivors, witnesses, and even investigators. And in media interviews and in the weeks following the incident, Ray avoided taking full accountability, often framing the tragedy as an unfortunate event that was beyond his control. Give me a break. People died. But luckily, survivors and witnesses reported that Ray had ignored pleas from participants to leave the sweat lodge and just continued to push them past their physical limits. His reluctance to accept responsibility became a focal point in his later trial, where prosecutors highlighted his negligence and failure to prioritize the safety of the participants. Ray's downplaying of the sweat lodge incident ultimately contributed to his conviction for negligent homicide in 2011. His lack of response or even remorse to the clear dangers during the ceremony and his dismissive attitude afterwards were clear elements that prosecutors used to argue that he failed his duty of care to those who attended his retreat. Following the sweat lodge tragedy, the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office launched a full-scale investigation into the deaths, and Ray was charged with 3 counts of negligent homicide. The trial began in 2011, with prosecutors arguing that Ray had created an unsafe environment and that his negligence had led to the deaths of 3 people. During the trial, witnesses testified that Ray had ignored multiple signs of distress and failed to provide proper medical assistance when participants began collapsing. Prosecutors pointed out that Ray had a history of pushing people to their physical limits in previous seminars, and that this was not the first time attendees had been injured. The families of the victims, Kirby Brown, James Shore, and Liz Newman, spoke out during the trial, describing their loved ones' desire for personal growth and how they trusted Ray to guide them safely through the retreat. The defense, on the other hand, argued that participants were adults who had made their own decisions to stay in the sweat lodge despite clear risks. And I always hate this argument because it goes to show the lack of understanding of coercive control. I think if this had happened recently, probably within the last 5 years, especially after the Nexium case, I think the outcome would have been much, much different. I think James Arthur Ray would have ended up in jail for a much longer time. But, double jeopardy. He's out of jail now. So even though he was found guilty of 3 counts of negligent homicide, and while the prosecution had wanted a harsh sentence, Ray was ultimately sentenced to 2 years in prison. 2 years in prison for the negligent homicide of 3 innocent people and dozens of others being put in the hospital. Now, this was a punishment that many, including myself, feel was way too lenient considering the tragic loss of life. Ray's sentence sparked outrage from the victims' families who deserved that he should have faced more consequences. And then, get this, he only served 20 months. He didn't even serve a full 2-year sentence. He was released in 2013, and after his release, what did he do? Did he change his ways? Did he try to be better? No. He sought to rebuild his life and his brand. He began hosting smaller seminars and appearing in interviews where he spoke about his prison experience. You're really going to leverage your prison experience to try to help people through their spiritual growth? What an exploitative prick. He says that he learned so many lessons from prison and from the tragedy. But, of course, a lot of critics argue that Ray had never fully acknowledged his role in the deaths, and that his attempt to recenter himself in the self-help world was an insult to the families who had lost loved ones. And unfortunately, there are still people who support Ray, believing that he'd paid his debt to society. But others express deep concern that he's once again leading vulnerable people down a dangerous path. The story of James Arthur Ray serves as a stark reminder of the dark side of the self-help industry. While many seek guidance in their personal journeys, it's essential to stay critical and aware, especially when faced with extreme practices or promises. There is no quick fix to self-help. You have to decide every single day to make a valuable change in your life, and it can be really hard to start out. So if you're trying to do that, just know that doing these intense practices aren't suddenly going to make you a better, different person. It takes intentional baby steps day by day by day, small little incremental changes that you can stick to every single day. It can be as simple as reframing a thought in your mind if you tend to think really negatively or have a lot of negative self-talk. And that could be the work that you do. Yes, is there something to say that when you do something hard, you feel better about yourself? But let me tell you, as someone who recently started getting on the stair stepper every morning for 45 to 60 minutes, that alone will make you feel like a superstar, okay? It will make you feel like you can accomplish everything. So do not spend $10,000 going to one of these retreats. Spend $20, go to a Planet Fitness, and get on the stair stepper until your legs want to fall off, because it's hard, but it will make you feel so empowered at the end of it. You do not have to go to such extremes. Because listen, the lives lost at that Sedona sweat lodge should never have happened and should never be forgotten. We must honor them by ensuring that other people don't fall into that same trap. So please, if you are needing self-help, vet the people that you're following. Pay attention to the scandals that they have. And trust your gut. If something is screaming at you, telling you, even whispering to you that something's wrong when it comes to a spiritual guru or spiritual experience that you're having, listen to that voice, because that voice is 100% trying to take care of you. Thank you so much for watching this deep dive and for supporting my channel. And I would love to hear your thoughts on the self-help industry below. And I'm curious, have you ever been to a retreat? Have you ever experienced something like this? All in all, I hope that we're able to do a better job of taking care of ourselves and looking out for the red flags when it comes to these self-help gurus and influencers, because I hate to be the one to say it to you, but they're not just altruistic. They're not just trying to help you. They're trying to make money off of you. And if it sounds extreme, if it sounds out of the ordinary, if it sounds like a rare amount of people are able to do this, so if you do this, you're one of the few people that can withstand the physical pain and torture of this certain activity, no matter what it is, whether you're walking on coals, you're sitting in a cold plunge for 5 minutes. If it's really making you feel bad, if everything in you is screaming, end this now, get out, leave, do not do this, listen to that voice, because that is the voice that loves you the most, loves you a lot more than these self-help gurus, because they, a lot of them, not all of them, but they really are just out to get your money. And they know that the best way to get your money is to tell you that if you do some type of extreme practice, that you pay them to have access to that practice, then you'll become enlightened. And that's simply not the case. So please take care of yourselves out there, guys. Ask questions and please always stay skeptical. I will see you in my next video very soon. Thank you all so much for tuning in today. And please be safe out there. Bye.